So I want to welcome everyone to today's session with Katie Anderson and Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, the three functions of a people-centered leader. Uh, Katie, I'll switch over to you. You can pop up your slides. And I want to say, for those who haven't met Katie before, I met her while she was doing a tour with Mr. Yoshino. They came through Chicago, and I had a wonderful day with them with their workshop. And so I think you guys will really enjoy this session.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm glad you're able to be here today. I love talking with people around the world about leadership and learning and how we all can be contributing to creating learning organizations that really are based on the foundation of respect for people and continuous improvement. I consider my sort of purpose in this world to inspire others to live and lead with intention. And I'll talk to you a bit about why that word intention is so meaningful to me, as well as how that connects with your purpose as a leader and as a coach in service of creating a learning organization. So great. Looks like I'm able to share my screen. So good. Awesome.
Awesome.
It's good. I finally have a large screen and I have my laptop. And so it's been exciting to sort of increase my functionality. I also have a nice mic now, although side story, I had user error for about 2 weeks, thinking that this is where visualization doesn't always mean it's working right. So the little green dot was on, but I didn't know you had to individually choose the microphone to be working with each individual web application. So I'm all set up now though. So we're also here today, not just talking about my own personal experiences, which I'll be sharing with you and some tips and ideas that I've had about how to become a better people-centered leader, but also talking about the wisdom that I've gained from working with Mr. Yoshino, who Tony mentioned, and resulting in the book Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, Lessons from Toyota Leader Isao Yoshino on a Lifetime of Continuous Learning. And for those of you who don't know who Mr. Yoshino is, he is this amazing people-centered leader who worked at Toyota for 40 years and played some very important roles in the development of Toyota's culture that we now know and revere as sort of the model for what was often called lean management. And he was John Shook's boss in the 1980s. John Shook, who was the former chairman of the Lean Enterprise Institute, who also was the very first non-Japanese employee of Toyota back in the 1980s when Toyota was joining forces with GM to create the NUMMI joint venture just a few miles away from where I am currently standing here in Northern California, and how that really was an experience that showed that you can change a culture by developing people and giving them opportunities for doing things in a different way. So I'm going to keep moving forward here. And one of the really important lessons that I took away from my time with Mr. Yoshino, and I guess I should unwind just a little bit, like how did I even get to know this man? I have been a lean practitioner for many, many years, came from a healthcare background, and then started my own consulting practice in 2013. And just a few months later, in 2014, we found out for my husband's job, total serendipity, that we had the opportunity to move to Japan. And through that time, I got to be introduced to Mr. Yoshino. We were actually at a conference together in Long Beach in July of 2014. And you can read about that, that experience, and I'll tell a few things here about that too, of how that really has transformed my own personal experience of what leadership means. But fast forward, I went and spent time with him in Japan, and one day turned into regular visits and now a deep friendship and partnership that has transcended continents and COVID and all of that. And one of the things that was most intriguing to me when I first started spending time with Mr. Yoshino was to really understand what was the secret sauce of Toyota. And I kept asking questions to really try and understand this for myself, and then also share those insights with people on the blog that I had recently started when we moved to Japan. And he said to me one day, there is no secret Toyota. And then he sort of unwound and said, actually, the only secret Toyota is its attitude towards learning. And he reiterated that through countless stories of his own experience of both being a learner and then being a leader as well. And the real intention and focus that Toyota has put in creating its learning culture. And one of the lovely things, this is actually a picture of us from Japan in January this last year. I was going out to prepare for what had been my 2 sold out Japan study trips this year. Of course, those didn't happen, but we got to spend the day together, which was wonderful. And one of the biggest heartwarming things for me about working for the last several years on this book with Mr. Yoshino and documenting his stories is his own experience of what the process of reflection has been for him. And that he, with having, I guess, the opportunity to look back, the space, someone asking questions, he says that he's learned and relearned things about his life and his experiences that he hadn't really seen or understood in that same way before. And so it's really great that we've been able to capture those and share those with you as well. I mentioned at the start of today that we were going to use the word intention. And that is someone that's been really, really important to me through my whole life and became more I guess, have a deeper meaning when I moved to Japan. When I practice lean, I don't care about the Japanese words, but here I was living in Japan. And so I started learning Japanese, and I didn't have a business logo at the time, and I needed business cards. And so I told the business card company to put the word for intention on my card. And I learned quickly that the lower part of the symbol on the left actually represents the word heart. And the one on the right is direction. That's the same symbol as in Hoshin Kanri. And I've come to see that is that really having our intention is about connecting with our purpose, what's most important inside of us. And then how do we align our behaviors, our actions in that direction? And in a leadership context, this is so important because we can get caught up in the busy, in the chaos, in the sense of urgency and firefighting, that sometimes we lose connection with that purpose as a leader to really be developing people, creating a learning organization, creating a culture of trust and respect. And sometimes our habits unintentionally are not aligned with that. So have a little interactive portion. I know Tony had asked you to think about some things beforehand. I have 2 questions for you. You can go to the Mentimeter, and I'm going to do a new share here. So go to menti.com and enter this passcode here, and we will go over to here and see what your answer is. So I'm curious on what best describes your professional role, thinking about who's here in the audience today. So we'll put that in for a moment, and we can come back to that. I don't see any answers coming through. I don't know if this is, oh, shoot, I had the wrong Menti code. Sorry, guys. Go to this other Menti code here, 7663478. I apologize. That was like an old code that was there. So go to the one on top of the slide, 7663478. Tony, maybe you could pop that into the chat as well so that we have that. And we'll come back to this slide too. But I also want to reflect on using that very same code. You were asked at the beginning of this when you registered to think about your own purpose as a person and as a leader, and some of the words that would describe your purpose. So I'd like you to put those into the Menti now as well. And we'll come back and reflect on that as we go through the course of the session and potentially move into the Q&A as well. So again, 763634778. Go back to the slides. Okay. So dialing back to the very first time that I met Mr. Yoshino, this is the Lean Coaching Summit, and this was actually Mr. Yoshino here with John Shook after the conference, and you can see are in Long Beach, so they're all ready to go. And Mr. Yoshino said some really funny things and some very profound things as well. And this one comment here that's showing up on the screen has really impacted me and what I now consider to be the 3 most important functions of a leader in fulfilling your purpose. And that is to a leader's purpose about setting the direction, providing support to your people, and developing yourself at the same time. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time just sharing a few stories and experiences here. There's so much more richness in the book, and we certainly can talk more about this as we get to the end. I just wanted to whet your appetite. So the first element of a leader's purpose is about setting the direction. This is about providing clarity on a challenge, the direction, a clear target that your organization and your people should be moving towards. I work with so many organizations and individuals who come back saying, well, we don't actually know the target. We don't know how things should actually be working. And they're spending a lot of time thinking about the current condition. But the problem equation in its true simplicity is target minus actual equals gap, or the problem. So how do we create alignment and towards the bigger direction of where the organization needs to go, as well as clarity on the specific targets that we need to achieve to fulfill our organization's purpose? An important element too to remember is that targets should be determined by what is needed, not just by what is achievable. It's sometimes I hear people talking about, well, what do we think we actually can achieve this year, rather than what do our customers need, what do our customers value? So it's sort of looking at targets from the wrong angle, particularly in healthcare where I came from. It would be challenging to sit and listen to conversations like, what sort of error rate do we think is our target for this year? No, the challenge should be 0. And then how do we work our way to get there? And Mr. Yoshino talks a lot about failure and his own failures on both the small side and the large side, but about how can we set challenging targets so that it pushes us to think about things in a new way, and it almost forces failure, because failure and struggle is where the learning happens. And of course, we need to have an organization that then isn't punitive and blaming people when they're not immediately achieving a target. So those two things have to come hand in hand. I gave a workshop to a large group earlier this week, and I asked people, what was the thing in their organization that most inhibited people from taking responsibility for problem solving or thinking? And it was overwhelming. The word fear. Fear came out so much. So how can we also have a culture where there's no fear? So there's also this concept of we need to push in and have a challenge and push people into places maybe where they didn't think was possible. Yet at the same time, as leaders and as coaches, we also need to provide some nurture and support so people aren't feeling like they're just pushed out into the deep end when they don't know how to swim yet, and that there is that safety net and they're encouraged to move forward. And this is a real challenge sometimes when we're talking about a learning organization, because there's the technical side of problem solving and the social side of coaching for problem solving. And those are two different leadership skills that we need to have, or coaching skills if you're a continuous improvement professional. So this moves into the second really important element of a leader's purpose. So you got to set that clear challenge and the target and create alignment and get people moving in that same direction, but not be directive about how we're going to get there. Instead, provide the support. And a leader's role is about helping other people develop capability and confidence to do that. And a few ways that leaders can do this is, one, setting the conditions for success and taking responsibility for when mistakes happen. And this goes back to this concept of having a no blame, no fear culture. And I was really astounded by but it didn't surprise me, the feedback that the people in this other session said. And Mr. Yoshino shares this story. He was laughing when he told me this, remembering it a few years ago, of his very early days at Toyota when he was during his orientation program. Even though he was going to be in a back office role, he was assigned to the shop floor for 2 months to learn the value creation work of the organization. And he was assigned to the paint shop, and he made a big mistake. His simple task was to pour solvent and paint into a big vat that then would mix up the paint and spray it out onto the cars as they came across the line. Well, one day, the shop floor manager ran into the paint shop and said that about 100 cars were coming through the line and the paint wasn't sticking and would have to be repainted. And Mr. Yoshino, who was 22 years old at the time, was pretty worried. This is his first professional job. And he was shocked. Instead of kind of yelling at him or being mad at him or blaming him, his managers asked him to show them what he had done and then thanked him for making the mistake, because it was obvious that they had not created a work environment where it was the normal and the abnormal were not clearly visible. So if you think about 5S, they had not really set up the workplace for things to be in the right place or visible about which should be used at what time. And so they thanked him, saying that it was their responsibility to be taking ownership of creating a visible workplace where it was not easy to make such a mistake that he had. And I really challenge us all to think about that as our own human reaction to mistakes and failure. I can't imagine a similar situation in any organization that I've worked in, that at least the immediate reaction wouldn't have first been kind of being upset or angry at this individual, rather than looking at the process and then taking responsibility for that. So I encourage you to think about what are some things that you can do for yourself to have a different reaction, and what a powerful impact that would have on your organization. So leaders also, and coaches, I'd say too, anyone in a role called coach or a people development role, their responsibility is not the actual learning, but the process of learning. So how do we create conditions for people to learn, regardless if they're at the very beginning stage of their knowledge, or if they're in a much more advanced stage. And so this requires us to know whether or not we need to be more in a teaching role, being more directive or instructive, or working side by side so that somebody knows the process of how to do something, versus being in a more open coaching role where just asking questions helps nurture the thinking and development of the other person. And this is a real art. There's this great story too that Mr. Yoshino tells about his own experiences of a manager who was actually the senior leader in the Tokyo office at that time of Toyota. And he was sort of mid-career, in his early mid-30s at this point, had spent enough time in the actual supporting the factory and the headquarters of Toyota that he knew the importance of going to Gemba, or going out to where the actual work is happening and validating assumptions with his own eyes. And he was asked to prepare a report for the senior leader in the Tokyo office, and he felt crunched for time. And so instead of going out to conduct interviews and do some direct market research, he instead just went to the library and relied on some historical reports. And when he went forward to give his presentation, he had prepared an A3 size piece of paper with his report. The senior leader said, "Wait, tell me how you went about collecting this information." And he said, "Sir, I'm sorry, I felt like I didn't have enough time, so I just went to the library." And the leader said, "Stop, time out. That's not the way we do thinking here. I'm going to give you 1 more week so that you can go to Gemba and go do those interviews." And Mr. Yoshino did, and found out later that, he discovered over that week that there wasn't really any new information that he had. Those interviews validated what the information in the library was. But later he discovered that his boss didn't really care about the output of that report, if the information changed. He was more concerned about Mr. Yoshino learning the process of thinking, and that was the important role for him as a leader, was making sure that he was doing the right process, not just focused on the outcome. And again, I think that is a really helpful framework for us to consider as we're in leadership roles, and how do we also not just be focused on the outcome, but the process of learning that we help people through. Mr. Yoshino also talks about how do we make the invisible visible. And so, we think about 5S and how we can make workplaces visible. So important. How do we know normal from abnormal, if we're on track or off track? But also, how do we make our thinking visible, and the things that are not necessarily easy to make visible. And so this is the importance of also having status charts and visibility boards and other things. A3 thinking is all in service of putting our thinking and our ideas out in a way that can be communicated in an easy, simple way. And so it's so important for us to not just make assumptions or hold our thinking inside, but how do we make that visible so that everyone can use that information? And then a leader's purpose is develop yourself as well. And really, if you're going to be a learning leader and teaching other people to learn, you're always challenging yourself to learn too. And the moment we stop learning ourselves is really when we stop being humble and truly start. We start telling people what to do, or our hubris is we're not taking in inputs from other things. So how do you challenge yourself to always be learning? And that developing yourself or developing others is a path to developing yourself. And I found that to be true for myself. Some of the biggest, I love to learn, I love to solve problems, but for me, sticking with my intention of also helping others do the same has challenged me to look at my own habits and actions that might not be aligned with that, when my habits of being the person who is doing the problem solving or being more directive is taking over from my real intention of helping other people. And you can see on the background here, I have a big collection of darumas. These are these Japanese dolls that are weighted at the bottom. So if you knock them down, they right themselves back up like a weeble wobble. And it is a sign of when you have a goal, you fill in the daruma's left eye. And it's about the perseverance it takes, that you know you're going to fall down 7 times and get up 8, to keep persevering in service of achieving your goal. And when you finally achieve your goal, you get the nice reward of filling in the eye. So there are 3 practices that I have found super helpful for me about getting to be a more people-centered leader, supporting organizational culture of learning. The first is paying attention to the quality of your questions. I think this is probably the #1 disconnect between a leader or coach's purpose and true sense and that connection with the heart of developing other people, but not realizing that actually when you think you're asking questions and really supporting somebody's own thinking, you're being directive because you have a question disguised, or your idea disguised as a question. This is a funny looking animal. It's a wolf disguised as a sheep. And so really challenge yourself to think about or listen for when you are actually advocating for an idea, but it's disguised with a question mark at the end. Have you thought about trying my idea? Anything that's a yes or no question, or something that could be answered in multiple choice. These are really fake questions and are not true questions aligned with supporting someone else's thinking. And so put the 2 words what and how in your mind. Typically, if you're asking a question with what or how, you're more likely to ask a true, humble inquiry question asked to help someone else's learning. And I have a coaching questions guide that you can download to help you practice and structure, and 3 pages of sample questions. And there's no perfect question. It's all situational, but many people have found this helpful in their practice. The second is the corollary of asking questions is also listening openly. My coaching partner, Karen Ross, has done these drawings. And I like this concept of, it's not just listening openly with our ears, but how do we see openly with our eyes? And especially in this virtual environment, how are we really visualizing and seeing people? Because there's so many cues outside of just what's happening in our ears. How do we listen with an open mind and not just make assumptions about what's happening? How are we really hearing what someone's saying? And how do we listen with an open heart and the sense of compassion? And I think the COVID situation has really brought that home even more so. How are we checking with people and not just hearing the words coming out of their mouth, but the emotion that's behind it? And the third, and this has been transformational for me, it's about how to slow down and have even a momentary intention pause to connect with your purpose in this moment or on the big scale. And what are the actions you need to take to align with that purpose? My experience for myself is I'd be running from meeting to meeting. Sometimes I was the problem owner or needing to set the direction and the strategy for the group I was running in an organization. And other times I was there in a one-on-one or to be coaching a team. And the things that I needed to do to fulfill my purpose or my role in that moment were very different. And without having that intention pause, it was easy to sort of go along with my habits that were most natural to me, which were to be more directive, rather than slowing down and connecting on what was most important in that moment. And then always to remember that learning is never perfect and it's never complete, and that reflection is the beginning of learning. So how can we reflect on our own actions, where our organization is at, and then do the check, adjust part instead of just plan, do, plan, do, plan, do. So I want you all to set your intention about what is one thing that you're going to practice with intention. And I think what's really important about webinars like this is not just unidirectional, but having a conversation too. So Tony and I are going to have a chat, and we really want to open that up to anyone who is on this conversation as well.
A couple of things. First of all, I gotta show you. I still have my Druma doll.
Oh, great! Yay!
And he only has one eye filled in. COVID kind of slowed things down, but we're still resilient. We're getting knocked down, but we're still coming back again. So real quick too, if anyone has questions or anything, just pop them in. If not, we can also. I think we have a small enough group, but we can maybe even open it up if you want to
Yeah,
ask.
that'd be
But,
great. I love having the conversation.
yeah, and let me see. Yeah, we'll put it so that anyone can talk here. Um, but I do appreciate the opportunity and the chance. And like I said, I I got my copy of the book, and I do have questions for you because I prepped. But also just my general impression of the book, and I really appreciate when you get to, like you said, reflect and think back about, like 40 years at a company and what were the highs and the lows. I think overall, one of the things I really enjoyed about it is, yeah, they're not perfect. Everyone kind of, okay, it's Toyota, high esteem, but just walking through one person's journey through Toyota, you realize not everything is the best. And I don't think this is a spoiler, Katie, but how Mr. Yoshino talks about the end of his career at Toyota, where it actually didn't work, but how once again it was kind of like the bookends. The first time he made a mistake at the paint factory, and then at the end with the Toyota Marine Sports. Yeah.
Right, a $13 million failed business venture, and started with a small mistake and a big failure, but the reaction of the organization was very similar, which is I think just really profound.
Right, and especially the fact that the president, Mr. Cho, said no, it was a learning experience. This is good. How many companies would do that? So, and it is kind of interesting. Sorry, I don't really mean to monopolize the time. Anyone else?
No, I think a conversation.
We'll let you guys jump in. Of the no fear portion of it, and I know a lot of organizations it is kind of that way, and so those are some of the questions I have, and I think it's going to take a while for me to go through these, because there's an organization that I know really well, and it's like, oh yeah, there's definitely fear, and people actually refrain from speaking up when there's mistakes or errors, because they just don't, what was it, the tallest blade of grass gets cut, right? So don't stick your neck out, don't tell them, but it's not really doing a good service back up to management.
Yeah.
So kind of one of my questions is, if a company really isn't like a people-centered organization, and I know obviously people on this webinar they probably want to learn more about it, but if they go, oh yeah, but I'm in the middle, or I'm at the bottom, how am I going to influence those above me? So any advice along those lines?
I mean, I think we're all this. It's always a challenging place to be in. I always just try and remind myself that I can't change anyone but myself, and so it can be really easy to start focusing outward on all these people aren't doing this or that, and but I always go back to, okay, what's something that I can control, and how's like one way that what's something that I can do that sort of changes the dynamic. So my mom is a relationship therapist. So I grew up with this, we're always talking about a dynamic exists between two or, people or more. And if you can, your response or how you show up is different, you're automatically changing the dynamic. And so where can you show up differently, and how can that start influencing what you're seeing in the organization? And again, there's a certain point where if there's a big disconnect on the organization's purpose and your own sense of purpose, then that's a different introspection and questions to ask yourself about what you're doing.
Yeah, that's very good. All right. So, and one of the questions too, and it was early in the book, I marked it down all the way back to page 14, where Mr. Yoshino talked about how much he learned from you. And I thought that was astounding, because how many, managers and directors, executives would ever tell a subordinate, I've learned from you. So how did you react when you first heard that?
Well, I was so honored the very first time. That was his response to an email. I actually went back, and that was verbatim from the email that he had written to me after our very first get together in Japan. And I was so appreciative of that. And as we spent more and more time together, I mean, he continues to reiterate that as well. I just think it goes back to his fundamental mindset that he too is a learner, and that he's told me that the questions I ask and the way I'm framing them, or the perspective I'm coming at it with, has helped him see things in a different light, or examine his experiences in a different light, or having to articulate them. And that he's found that to be a really important exercise. In fact, I was I'm very humbled and honored that he says he's learned how to ask better questions through working with me, which is like, wow, so it is really a partnership. And I think this gets back to this concept of a chain of learning that he mentions in the book. But we often think, oh, the learning only goes from like the leader down, and so it's a chain of learning doesn't have to be unidirectional. It's the links between the people that create the strength and the power, and that can be, it has to come from both directions, right? It doesn't just come from one, otherwise it's pulling the chain apart. So yeah, how can we always be learning?
Yeah. And let me see, we got a couple questions here. Let's see. Oh yeah, I was guessing it was a challenge for Mr. Yoshino to work with and or the transition, the traditional thinking of managers at Fremont. Any insights on how to get them to help them be less punitive when there were failures? Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, there's so much written about Numi. I do encourage you to read the book because you get his true inside experience of what that was like. And Mr. Yoshino his responsibilities was to create the training program, the learning experience for the Numi workers when they came over to Japan to like learn TPS, or Toyota Production System, in the Toyota way. And he talks about, and we explore this in the book, about he realized he can't change their culture. But what he and his team, including John Shook, could do was to give them an experience of what something different looked like. So what a manager's reaction of not blaming, but instead supporting, what did that look like? And then how could they take that back? And his measure of success is that they had a good experience. So they had a happy smile on the face after 3 weeks and felt taken care of. And 2, that they had 1 or 2 specific things that they were going to do differently or bring back to the Numi plant when they went there. And so I think it gets back to, how do we change people? It's about giving them the opportunity for learning and just changing that dynamic just slightly and providing that support as well as the challenge.
I think it was nice in the book, the way he pointed out of kind of, besides just respect for people, respect for humanity, be open to the other cultures.
Mm.
And how we talked about how Americans are so open and we'll just talk about anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. And there's the upside of that is that we are open, but the downside is that sometimes we only are looking at our own perspective and not seeing others as well. So how can we move towards the positive and away from the negative about both sides of our habits? Yeah.
Okay, let's see too. Any insights how he helped them be less punitive or blaming when there was a failure? So it's kind of like the continuation of the previous question, once again from Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, how they got less punitive. Well, I think, again, I think it was because they were in this new environment, and they saw what happened when people didn't blame them. Mm-hmm. And so they realized what a positive experience that was. And then also Toyota wasn't like, oh, you're just one and done in this 3-week this training program. They actually then provided coaches. Their trainees in Japan went over for 3 months and worked alongside with them to help embed that thinking process and the coaching and site. And so again, how do we think about learning programs or training here in the US? It's often like, go to a 1-day class or something. Like, we don't, learning takes a lot longer, and it takes these times of failure and reflection and learning. What are you going to do next? So the coaching element is so critical as well.
Okay, so it's interesting. Once again, go ahead, feel free, put it in the chat or the Q&A portion. And I did have, okay, so this is one of my favorite quotes from the book, by the way. He said, I learned that being patient requires a lot of patience. Okay. And then, so my question was, how does this apply in today's hurry up, now type of world?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like Mr. Yoshino sometimes is like Yoda. He'll say these things and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so amazing. And yeah, he learned that being patient requires a lot of patience. And I think it's just a reminder, it's so hard to be patient. And again, I talk about how in our organizations, we often have created this sense of like urgency, and often it's false urgency. In healthcare, I've worked in hospitals and healthcare systems, and now many others as well, but there's always a sense of, we have to do this now, we need the answer now, or I just need to tell because everything's urgent and but it's not really. Yes, if it's an error going to a patient or something, there is definitely urgency, but not everything is a 5-alarm fire. And so how can we start even just taking like 30 more minutes of like, let's do a little bit deeper thinking? Or how do we say, oh, it sounds like you need to think about this. Why don't I come back in a day? Where are those spaces that we can just take a moment and recognize that we don't really need the answer today on that. And in fact, just throwing darts or throwing Band-Aids on it is doing a disservice. So when I work with organizations, again, it's just about how do we start creating structures that allow us to slow down a little bit more.
Good. Right. Yeah. Whatever time we can get, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we have to be intentional about being patient.
Yeah.
And it's our habit is like to jump. I mean, every day I have to remind myself, slow down. It doesn't all need to happen now or today. And in fact, the process, if we can slow down, the result might be better than if we just move forward quickly.
Right. By the way, very for me, the book was perfect timing. Some things had switched at work. A lot of new people report to me, and I'm like, okay, how can I rethink of how I'm going to move this forward? So thank you very much on that. Good timing. One of the other things too is, and it was part of your handset, is the questions at the end of the chapter, and when you were talking about practicing go to Gemba in our virtual world, and you also obviously mentioned Toyota's rethinking this. What kind of, what advice or what creative ways have you heard people trying to deal with go to Gemba when, like in COVID, that we're isolated and possibly not next to each other anymore?
Yeah, this is a hot topic. I run the facilitator for the Association for Manufacturing Excellence's consortia in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so the companies I'm helping where I facilitate this group for, we've been talking a lot about this. And, some of them are back, they're manufacturing organizations or healthcare organizations. So they have people on site, but their managers are either away or their managers are sometimes there. And so a few of the things that I have been hearing they've been experimenting with is one, how can you still keep your management structure and keep things visible? So we did a virtual Gemba and watched how there were like 3 nursing executives in their normal sort of Obeya room, their visibility wall of talking about the days, the day and everything they needed to be doing. And all the other managers and leaders were calling into that. So there was a combination of how do you still keep that same visual process. Others have moved to almost their teams are completely virtual. So they're still bringing forward the principles of how do you make things invisible visible. So how are they now migrating towards more visibility walls? And then others have been talking about how do you even take like a simple cell phone and like for the people who are, video, like, out there, like showing what's happening in the workplace, in the Gemba, and connecting with the people who are doing the work, even if they're not able to be there as well. So technology can be an enabler. It's not as, of course, it's better to be there in person, but there are ways we can still get closer to seeing, hearing, understanding, and connecting with people.
Excellent. Good. All righty. Once again, any other questions, please throw them in the chat or the Q&A section. That'll be fine.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also show people that, if you want to get in touch with me, yes. There's a book website, and I love connecting on LinkedIn or other places. So please connect. And if you want that coaching guide, it should work there as well. So,
right.
And Tony can send that out.
Yeah, I will mention too, with Katie, I know she does a good job, and I have this kind of a strange meter or measure of success for good coaches. And to me, and I told Katie this already, that good coaches make my brain hurt after I'm done talking with them, because that just means, wow, it just expanded it, or I didn't think of these types of things before. And Katie definitely does that. So yeah, feel free, reach out to her. Like I said, I could already tell how much I've grown, even from something as simple as how you ask the question, to even more larger things like even the MyHotion and those types of things that you did during the workshop. So I do really appreciate those.
Yes, for sure. And Mr. Yoshino are, talking about the virtual world. We're thinking about other ways that we can connect with people. We'd had all these plans this year to do more workshops together in the US and Europe. And what are some creative ways that we can still be connecting with people? So stay tuned and for all of that.
Yeah, perfect. So just one last thing. If they have one takeaway from today, what do you hope people can take out of the video?
So the one takeaway would be asking more effective questions and really paying attention to what's coming out of your mouth. Just that simple awareness of paying attention to really what you're saying and how it connects with your purpose or your intention can be really transformative. And you may be, I now can't listen to radio or anything without hearing how many closed-ended questions we all ask. We're advocating, introducing our ideas rather than really pulling forward other people's thinking. But of course, the other takeaway is go learn from Mr. Yoshino's wealth of experience and wisdom, and enjoy the book. You know, I wrote this from the heart and to help him bring his stories forward too. So I hope you learn and enjoy as much of the conversations that I have as well.
I know I have. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Yep. And we did record this, so hopefully we'll get it up soon. And once again, reach out to Katie if you guys have any other questions or comments. We appreciate it.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Please reach out.